Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I will start with the first question. Okay. So you were born in Poland and moved to South Africa, I think it says online, when you were 13. And you and your family had to move from there in 1982 to Austria, presumably due to the situation economically there and the imposition of sanctions and martial law in the country. And then you moved to South Africa in 1983 and went to Pretoria High School for Girls before you went to study actuarial science at UCT. And apparently because it was the only degree you could get a bursary for. That sounds like quite an upbringing. And how do you think that your formative years fed into where you are today, and specifically, how did your passion for finance come about? Because when I was reading your story, I understood the progression from Poland to Austria to South Africa to Pretoria Girls, and then how did we get into AXA and how did we get into finance?
So I had, as you can gather from this, I had a bit of a non-linear upbringing, which hides behind it a fair amount of hardship, because when you actually think at the age of 12, my parents, without kind of explaining to us what we're doing, they literally kind of overnight told us we're leaving. We pack a suitcase, we're leaving right now, because obviously they couldn't afford to tell us anything, in fact, ahead of time, because of the risks of us talking, as kids, because I've got a younger brother, younger sister. So, we literally overnight had to pack up suitcases, and we left Poland illegally. So, we left behind everything that matters, all your toys, all your favorite clothes. And we ended up in this, pretty grim refugee camp, which is now used for Syrian refugees by Austria. So it was like military barracks, where we spent about 9 months before we emigrated to South Africa. And on arrival in South Africa, my parents genuinely had $500 in the bank account. And so, it sounds ridiculous, but they were in their early 40s and they actually had to start working, and then their first salary paid for forks, knives and spoons. The second salary paid for beds and mattresses, and so they literally had to rebuild all these things that you guys take for granted when you look around your house that your parents have. We had to recreate, at least my parents did. So there wasn't a lot of focus on us. We kind of had to bring ourselves up in a way. And, I never really wanted to go into finance. My parents are medical doctors. And so, I grew up with this concept of I wanted to be a medical doctor. And I actually wanted to help people. And that's really was my entire framework. But there were no bursaries being offered for medicine. Consequently, because my parents really couldn't afford to pay for university, someone at Pretoria Girls High said to me, look, there's this thing called actuarial science. You have to be really good at maths and English. Okay, the English was a bit dodgy, but I was really good at written English. I just really couldn't speak English. And so, that's what I applied for. And I got this, what looked like an amazing, to an 18-year-old, an amazing bursary, because it paid for everything. It paid for accommodation and books and, obviously all your tuition. It gave me a living allowance and also opportunity to do a holiday work. So that's really how I got into finance. And I've got to be perfectly honest, when I started studying actuarial science, I didn't know what I was going to study. And when I finished actuarial science, I also had no clue what I've studied. And part of it has to do with your point of reference. So, in a communist country, there was no such thing as financial services, because, there was a government bank and you stored whatever money you earned, and everybody earned exactly the same, irrespective of whether you were a coal miner or whether you were a medical doctor. Whatever money you were paid, you stored in a bank account, which paid no interest. So there was no such thing as loans or savings or investments. And in fact, when I go back to Poland now, yes, there are banks and they do pay interest. So there is a greater level of financial sophistication than there was in early 80s, but it's not a huge level of financial sophistication. So for instance, unit trusts don't exist in Poland. The concept of, investing among general public doesn't exist. They still store money in the bank in cash, and they rely on a government pension fund to pay them a pension once they retire. So it's very difficult to say, well, I've chosen a financial services route without having any background in finance. I didn't. The financial services route chose me rather than the other way around.